All right, let's jump right in. Prior to 1991, India's economy was essentially locked behind a massive wall of red tape. It was heavily regulated, constrained by policies that were unfortunately driving a low rate of economic growth, rising unemployment, and honestly, just poor performance across public sector industries. We're talking about an environment of deep bureaucratic control. So in this explainer, we are going to unpack the monumental shift away from that era, a transformation we can absolutely call the Great Unlocking.
To make sense of the exactly 10 massive features of this policy, we're going to use a chunking technique to walk through this transformation phase by phase. We'll hit defining economic liberalization, unlocking India's industrial sector, unlocking finance and trade, modernizing the business ecosystem, and finally, the impact of liberalization.
So let's start with Section 1, defining economic liberalization.
Now imagine being a business owner back then, right? You literally needed government permission just to increase your factory's production by a few units. Or you'd have to wait years, literally years, just to get a commercial telephone line installed. That was the everyday reality of the infamous license Raj. So economic liberalization was the ultimate solution to that closed, stifled economy. It was about taking a giant pair of scissors to all that red tape. At its core, it was the deliberate policy of doing away with or significantly reducing the heavy-handed government controls over industry that existed before 1991. It was simply about letting the market breathe.
Okay, moving to Section 2, unlocking India's industrial sector. The old system had basically created an inefficient, high-cost, and weak industrial sector. It was completely unsustainable, and it was time for a radical change. These first 4 features smashed those old bottlenecks right open. First up, they abolished the requirement of licensing for most industries. No more endless waiting and lobbying bureaucrats just to start a business. Second, controls on monopolies were heavily relaxed. Third, they liberalized the industrial location policy. This was huge. Companies could now set up shop almost anywhere without government approval, skipping only the heavily populated cities with over 1 million people. And fourth, restrictions on mergers, takeovers, and the separation of industrial units were completely removed. Businesses could finally restructure seamlessly.
Now, the government didn't just throw all the rules out the window, though. They very smartly retained control over just 5 sensitive sectors. So unless you were looking to produce alcohol, cigarettes, hazardous chemicals, defense equipment, or industrial explosives, you were free. For those 5, you still needed a license. And this was a highly calculated move, kept in place strictly for security, strategic, social, and environmental reasons.
You have to look at the dramatic before and after contrast here. It's pretty wild. Under the old Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, or the MRTP Act, any firm crossing a specific asset threshold of 100 crore rupees was essentially chained down. They needed explicit government approval for almost any new investment proposal. It was a system that effectively punished companies simply for growing successfully. The new deregulation removed these restrictive practices entirely. The government stopped punishing size and shifted their focus completely to protecting consumers, taking action against unfair trade practices rather than preemptively blocking a company's growth.
Let's move into Section 3, unlocking finance and trade.
So now that domestic industries were free to operate, the rules surrounding money and international borders desperately needed an overhaul. This phase covers features 5, 6, and 7 of the policy. Feature 5, they introduced freedom of the capital market. A new company could finally raise money by issuing shares to the public without begging for government permission. To keep things safe, they created a brand new regulatory watchdog, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI. Alongside this domestic financial freedom, we got features 6 and 7, massive foreign exchange and foreign trade reforms that effectively tore down the walls to global commerce.
I want to lock in on this specific time frame, 1993 to 1994, because these years were monumental for the foreign exchange market. The government introduced a flexible exchange rate determined by market forces rather than strict state control, with the RBI stepping in only to prevent extreme volatility. But the absolute crowning achievement here, making the rupee fully convertible into foreign currency on trade accounts. Think about what that means. If you're an Indian business exporting goods, you can now seamlessly convert your dollar earnings into rupees at market rates. It removed a massive layer of friction, making international trade vastly easier and a lot more profitable.
And that shift meant absolute freedom to import capital goods. By considerably relaxing tariff restrictions and completely abolishing import quotas, Indian industries could finally get their hands on the advanced, global machinery and technology they desperately needed. They could upgrade their operations and actually compete on a modern worldwide scale. The doors were finally truly open to global innovation.
Right. Let's transition to Section 4, modernizing the business ecosystem.
Fixing factories and borders was essential, for sure, but the day-to-day ecosystem businesses operated in needed an overhaul just as badly. So for Features 8, 9, and 10, the government boldly allowed the private sector into domains the state used to hoard, crucial infrastructure like power, roadways, communications, shipping, aviation, and banking. Furthermore, they aggressively simplified the rules for everyday licenses, drastically enhancing the overall ease of doing business. And finally, they let the market, not bureaucrats, decide the prices of everyday essentials like petroleum and sugar through sweeping price decontrols.
This slide highlights a massive philosophical shift embedded in that final feature. Through comprehensive banking reforms, the central bank fundamentally changed its entire DNA. The Reserve Bank of India shifted its role from being a strict, policing regulator that micromanaged commercial banks to becoming a facilitator. It became more like a coach, designed to help the financial sector grow, expand, and operate smoothly. It's an incredible dynamic shift.
And now we reach the climax, Section 5, the impact of liberalization.
So, what did all these 10 massive changes actually achieve for India? Well, a complete systemic transformation. The policy effectively dismantled the old system, unleashing unprecedented freedom to entrepreneurs who could now enter almost any industry. This naturally injected a fierce, much-needed spirit of competition into the economy, pushing people to invest and innovate. And crucially, by removing the barriers of the old MRTP Act, bigger projects finally had the green light. Massive companies could expand across various products without arbitrary limits holding them back.
For the everyday business owner, escaping the suffocating control raj was hands down the most tangible, immediate relief of this entire era. The previous system was just plagued with uncalled delays, corruption, and endless red tape. By implementing automatic license approvals in many cases and simplifying the rules, liberalization swept away these massive, invisible taxes on time and innovation. It literally allowed Indian businesses to move at the speed of the market, rather than the speed of a slow-moving bureaucracy.
So, when we look back at this incredible transformation, the delicensing, the unchaining of monopolies, the opening of trade and infrastructure, we really have to ask ourselves, how does this great unlocking of 1991 continue to dictate India's explosive trajectory in the global economy today? Consider how this firm foundation of deregulation perfectly set the stage for the massive waves of privatization and globalization that immediately followed. It took an economy on the very edge of default and turned it into a modern global powerhouse.